data in solving healthcare challenges. And our moderator is quite a fascinating woman. And just to give you a little bit of information on her, she has won several awards, such as Viva 400 Award for the most inspiring woman in the Netherlands, top 100 young sustainable leaders in the Netherlands from Sustainability 100 Foundation, and EU India 40 Leadership Award. So you must be wondering, so what's so special? Well, she obtained her master's degree in medicine from the Academic Medical Center University of Amsterdam, and thereafter she did fundamentals of business from Harvard Business School. So the combination of medicine and business puts her in the best position to be the moderator. She also is the author of the book Chill: How to Survive Stress and Improve Personal and Professional Productivity. I'm definitely going to get the book after we finish this session. Welcome, Dr. Kohli, over to you.
Thank you so much for a great introduction. But today is definitely not only about me. So in this session, we will cover an interesting topic that came up in a remarkable COVID-19 summit that took place last November. And this summit was organized jointly by Swiss Re, the world's largest reinsurer, and Palantir, the data analytic company. And this summit was conducted under the motto COVID-19 from reacting to managing. And it consisted of 40 plus individual presentations and 4 panel discussions, all delivered in the course of just 4 hours, and to which several top-notch universities, market research institutes, and data providers from across the world contributed. And it reflected 8 months of collaborative work. So you may wonder what made such a collaboration among parties which usually fiercely compete work. And the secret consisted of invoking the spirit of what is called the Republic of Science. Well, this brings me straight to the topic of this fireside chat today, for I believe this is a concept that could prove very powerful to our community. And today I have the honor of hosting Dr. Luca Marighetti, who was the one who rediscovered the Republic of Science idea in a COVID-19 context, and who is going to tell us the story. So hearing the concept from the horse's mouth, as it were, here. We will also discuss possible applications in our context as well. But before we enter the conversation, let me briefly introduce Luca, who has a very interesting background. So Luca is a polymath, and he was born in Milan in 1961. And in fact, just across Santa Maria del Grazie, I hope I pronounced that correct, but this, and the garden in which Leonardo used to work when he was living in Milan. And Luca is very proud of this. But not only that, this proved inspirational. Luca attended the scientific high school in Italy and Germany, studied Romanic and German medieval philology, absolved a PhD at the cutting edge between literary theory and philosophy of science. Then, bored with academia, he left in 1987 to start a career with Procter & Gamble, and later SC Johnson Wax. He then moved to the fast-moving consumer goods. He left in 1993 to join McKinsey, where he worked for the assembly, basic chemicals, and financial services industries. And soon after turning partner, he joined Deutsche Bank as a divisional board member in 2001. He then moved on to the banking arm of the Alliance Group. From there, he then moved again in 2011, but this time to Zurich Insurance as the group head of strategy. And towards the end of that assignment, he got a little bored with strategy and developed a taste for the upcoming tech transformation. This is when in fall 2016, he finally joined Swiss Re as group head tech transformation. And next month, he will go into early retirement to pursue his scholarly interests and possibly an academic career. So it seems like we have gone full circle, and this is, I'm very impressed. I believe the audience will also be very impressed with this amazing profile. So Luca, I have already consumed too much time with my introduction here. How did you come across the Republic of Science idea?
Well, really, it was a sequence of serendipitous events, if you so want. Let me start with how we started with the COVID exercise, because it was kind of really a year ago, it became apparent what kind of crisis we would be facing. And one problem every insurance company has, and so we did, was to look at the data and try to figure out what the pandemic would do to our in-force books, really, for us, but also for our clients. I mean, what we do, reinsurance, is we insure insurance companies, and they also rely on us to understand how their position is. So then we kind of realized there were a wealth of data available from all possible open source sources, but all those data, the measurement was slightly different in every country. They were cumbersome to access. And so you could do the stuff, but you had to download things on your server and then process them internally, integrate the data, get the ontology straight, and so on and so forth. So it was not practical. So at the same time, we were working already for a couple of years with Palantir, and what Palantir excel at is really to do this data integration exercise. So we said, okay, what we do for ourselves internally, maybe we can do it on a global scale using all those data sources that are available. And we did a proof of concept over a weekend, and it worked. So it was the first time ever that data integration on a global scale was done. And so we had all the data, and actually it was not a data lake, it was a data river, because we had all this creek of data coming in, and then we can the portal that we have updates every hour, just looks whether there's some new data available and integrates them. And then new and new sources have been added over time. So we had all those data, but we didn't have the capacity really to analyze it, even not even with 3 years, enough modeling capacity to work at such a scale. So I was sitting there, and then that was the time when I was already preparing to exit, if you want, corporate life. So I was working on my MIT inaugural lectures on the ethics of science and its funding. That was supposed to be delivered last May, but then it has to be postponed to God knows when COVID is over, really. So, and there I was studying Koch Industries as an example for somebody who has studied at MIT and then donated a lot, but also with a pretty questionable reputation with regard to what these firms are actually doing. And so I was very negative about it, but then I started to study it, because it cannot be that somebody so successful can build such a business on a set of frauds and lies and so on, the stuff that you can read in the press. So I studied, and one of the basic concepts upon which he has built the way he organizes firms, so his own firms in Koch Industries, is the idea of the Republic of Science. And so I was kind of enthused by this phrase, and I traced it back to Michael Polanyi, who used it back in the early 60s, and basically describes an ideal world where the scientists collaborate with each other to achieve progress going forward. And, and that basically is a depiction of how science used to work before it got politicized after World War I. And that is something that all scientists actually would love to have back. And I thought, okay, maybe we should do a Republic of Science for COVID. And so I called on two friends, one Dimitris Pertsimas of MIT, the other one Russ Altman of medical school in Stanford, and said, look, I have a barter deal here to offer. We have all those wonderful data. We make it available to your researcher. I'm sure they're doing something on COVID. And in return, we get models published on our platform as well, so that we can make sense out of the data. So that resonates immediately. Over a weekend, actually was Easter weekend of last year, we kind of struck the deal. And so we started. And from there, this collaboration has started that then involved other reputable universities, and the last station of it was making the platform available to Trinity College and the Trinity Challenge that Sadie Davis is organizing in Cambridge, UK. So that was the story. I was surprised because, I put in this phrase as an idea, and then it resonates immediately in the entire academic community, but also we had other firms joining, like the data providers, Moody's and S&P and what have you, and they all wanted to join the Republic of Science. And that's how this thing emerged. And then we thought, okay, we've learned so much over the course of those 8 months, so let's have a rundown of all the results. But we had so much content, and so we had to compress it into 4 hours, and everybody only had 4 minutes to present. So that is the story, really. There is a serendipity in it, but I think there's also substance, and that I think could and should be leveraged beyond this exercise for the pandemics, but potentially also for future crises of which we don't know yet.
Well, yes, certainly, Luca, and thank you so much for sharing how actually this the platform of the Republic of Science started and existed, and it indeed sounds like an ideal world, this collaboration on data. But then my next question to you would be, how did you then practically connect the Republic of Science idea to the COVID-19 crisis? How did you go about it, and what happened then?
Well, no, what we had was a real problem to solve, okay? We didn't even think about commercialization at the beginning. It was not a problem. The problem was, there's a crisis here, there's a crisis of huge proportions. So let's get our forces together in a fancy-less manner. That was also the time where some politicians were politicizing the entire story. That was not helpful. And I thought, let's get all those great brains together to try to help solve the problem. So that's the way it worked. And then fortunately, we had the Foundry, which is the data management technology at our hands that we could leverage. And, and there we go. The entire thing snowballed into a portal that we call now the Risk Resilient Portal, where all those data are basically aggregated, plus data on all possible economic measures. And so with that platform for us and for our clients, but also for academia, we use it to plan the reopening. We use it to see interdependencies between different elements. We use it to simulate the economic impact, and so on and so forth. So it's very versatile.
Well, while I hear you saying about this measuring of the economic impact as well, I can imagine that there must also be a big commercial interest in all of this. Can you elaborate a bit more? So what about the commercial interest, and how do you see that?
But the commercial interest, again, at the beginning, nobody was talking about commercial interest. So then we invited data providers as Refinitiv, Moody's, and others. And they started collaborating. And then they said, look, this thing that we're doing has never been done before. There must be a commercial value. And we cannot, basically everybody joining this Republic of Science COVID effort was doing that pro bono. So that is clearly, you can do it for a year, but you cannot do it forever. And then he said, look, let's find a way to transform this platform into a utility that can be used and accessed from different parties, each of them contributing some of the data and each of them contributing the money necessary to run it. But the idea is for that to be a utility as opposed to a proprietary exercise, if you want, a purely commercial exercise. And the lesson that I'm learning, but is still evolving, is that the moment you do something that is really good, that people find helpful, then money is not the issue anymore.
Well, I have to agree with your last sentence. When something is really good, then yeah, why would the money play a role? But there may be another question that may also come up in our audience, and what also came up in my mind is what then happens when you look at the data and the IP ownership of all of this? How will you go about that?
Well, excuse me. The one thing is the IP ownership of those who contributes the models, so academia. So the principle is very simple. The IP is with whoever created it. So we're not claiming exclusivity or anything. The researcher publish and do whatever they need to do for their careers, separated from the platform, but they just make the model available so that the user of the platform can use it. So then the other aspect is the data from non-open source sources. Those are the Moody's, S&P, and so on of this world. They're making a ground stock of data available, and then if people want more, they can purchase it on top. So, and so Swiss Re happens to be in the middle just because we started this. It's not like Swiss Re is a natural owner of all this, but there's some logic in having an insurance company doing it. Just because insurance lives out of data, I mean, that's our lifeblood, it's our electricity, it's everything. And finally, one thing that proved really critical for making this all happen is that the fact that whoever provides data can fully control what is being done with the data. That's a unique feature of the platform that we have. It allows to be not only completely GDPR grade compliant, but also for those who upload data to basically determine who can see those data, to which purpose, for how long, and so on and so forth. So, and that was critical because everybody is very jealous of the data they have.
Well, I indeed understand that that's a very critical factor, that you're able to control the data that is there on the platform. Well, this may all work in the developed world. What about developing countries who might have limited data and limited resources? Will it work there as well?
Well, I would kind of challenge the notion that there are not enough data around. That is what I keep hearing all the time in different areas. The reality is that people have much more data than they think they can possibly have. But data answers to a question. So if you have the right question, then you go out and figure out how you answer the question with the data that you have. So there's a wonderful book published by Douglas W. Hubbard, How to Measure Anything, in 2007. It's a very famous book. He did that in general terms in this book. He also did another one with Seasen on how to measure anything in cybersecurity risk. And it's amazing what is available if you ask the right question. So I think third world countries have data. They have more data than they think they have. They need to start asking the right question. They need to start using the utility to leverage those data. And then from there, a number of things can emerge that could even be extremely, I would say, profitable for the countries participating. Because one thing is, making the utility running. That is not a big expense if enough countries join. On top of that, however, the moment you have all those data, you can sell access to the data to whoever wants to invest or do things in those countries. So people will be willing to pay a fortune for it. So don't think of it as a cost. Think of it as an opportunity for those countries to actually, be on the receiving end of the data game as opposed to on the giving end. That is what most people fear they would be.
Well, it is indeed all about asking the right questions, especially now and in the future and in the situation that we are in. I want to make a little bit the connection with our health and our healthcare. How can we link all of what you have told with the concept of precision medicine, in your opinion?
Yeah, but precision medicine is actually, again, is asking very simple, basic questions. So there was all those data from clinical trials, hospital, and so on and so forth. And then I think it was actually Russ Altman had the idea to say, look, all those drugs, and most drugs have been discovered already, they also have secondary effects, okay? So the most famous example for all this is Viagra, and everybody knows it. So you design a drug for a certain indication, then you go through the trials, and then if you're lucky enough, it doesn't kill too many people, and it cures at least 30% of the trialists. So that's a basis. However, in this process, you discover what else this drug does. So, and then, it could be a compound X that kills me on the spot, but cures your cancer because we have a different genome. So the moment you integrate those data sources, then you can figure out how you can develop a bespoke treatment so that you give that particular drug to somebody who can benefit from it, recognizing that not everybody will have the same response. So that is the idea. Now, what I see happening across the world, third world, but also in developed countries, is the number of natural experiments, I would call them, taking place. The data have been generated, but nobody's asking the question, what can we do with those data? But you could think of it in terms of what David Walcott was calling reverse pharmacology. So you see what has happened in the past. That was not intended, but you have the data, and then you discover things that can be extremely helpful, either by avoiding giving the wrong treatments, but also discovering that people who have given a certain treatment for a certain indication actually end up getting healthy again on different indications that we didn't think of. So this is the type of exercise I think should be done. And I think there's a real opportunity here to potentially this way discover treatments for COVID. And that would be very important because from all what we see is now fine. If everything goes well, then in a year from now, the world will be vaccinated. The reality is the virus will keep mutating. So, one thing is vaccinating constantly, but another thing is also developing some treatments. And maybe there are golden nuggets in the data that we can discover if people collaborate. Again, the core here is fancy-less collaboration in the interest of the community to solve what I see really as a typical or clear tragedy of the commons, that if everybody tries to, I keep my vaccines for myself, I keep my treatments for myself, I don't give it to the Chinese, I don't give it to the Russian, I don't give it to the US. That is not a way to solve the problem. The virus doesn't care about national borders, doesn't care about forms of government. The virus just cares about reproducing. And the only response that we can give is a collaborative one and not a political one.
Well, you are saying a few very, very important lines there. And indeed, we must connect all these worlds together. And this brings another question to my mind. Because how could the Republic of Science then actually help prevent a next pandemic? It's not only healthcare, climate is also being mentioned. How can we connect those worlds even more, preventing a possible next pandemic?
But look, the way I see this is there are two aspects really. One is I see a change in attitude, and I mean, as long as flying was possible, I was one of those people who used to cross either ocean kind of 3 times a month to go and meet somebody and so on. Insurance is a global business. So, and one thing I was noticing is there's a change of mindset. If you think kind of historically a bit, after World War II, everybody was collaborating to rebuild the world that was destroyed by the war. Then it came a phase of, introducing welfare. In the US, there was a particular problem with human rights. So those things were then addressed. So then we had a mushrooming regulation. And so the next priority was to deregulate to keep the economy running. And now people are coming to realize that there are a set of problems that are tragedy of the commons on a global basis. So they can only be solved through collaboration. Pandemics is an example. And the pandemics, fortunately, mortality is comparatively low. I mean, if you compare that to the pandemic of 1918 or to the bubonic plague in the Middle Ages in Europe, mortality is bearable in comparison. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying. So now we could have a new virus emerging, and mortality could be much higher. So, and imagine if mortality would not be around 2-3%, depending on how you count it, but 20 or 25, like it was in the bubonic plague. Actually, bubonic plague was up to 40%. So we cannot afford not to be prepared for such disasters, and we cannot afford to just answer to emerging crises of this kind just by using gut feelings. Data can help us to inform high-quality decisions. Data that do not give you all the answer, but it helps you formulate a policy response that is actually robust. So that is where I see, if you want, the basis for collaboration, but also see many people, not all politicians, but many, changing their mindset in this respect, recognizing that climate is a global problem, pandemics is a global problem, cyber is a global problem, and probably there are a few others we could figure out where an approach of collaboration based on facts, science, data can help a great deal solving the problem. But then it would be kind of back to those in powers to actually empower such an approach. And pretty much with that, I would say I would like to pass this poll back to the audience, because I can propose, I can talk about the experiment we did. It was pretty successful on our smaller scale, but maybe there's interest to do that on a larger scale.
Well, I do believe that the key word for today is collaboration, and you are right. We cannot afford not to work on this. So my last question before we move on to questions from the audience to you is: so what is the next big development coming up now? Looking at the Republic of Science, what are the next steps?
Well, no, we're continuing the exercise with regard to insurance, reinsurance. There's a continued interest in academia up to the Trinity Challenge. So that is develop its own dynamics, if you want. So beyond that, I think the dynamics of what is happening on a global basis are going to force a different way of collaboration between states, institutions, academia, industry, because otherwise those problems will not be addressed. So, and it's only a question of time that will come. So can we accelerate that? That would be my hope, as opposed to wait until we run into the next disaster with a lot of reparation to be done. There's a way to prepare for possible crises. And so I see that kind of developing. And I think also that insurance as an industry will play a role here, because at the end of the day, if a major damage occurs, you want money to be around to repair it. But if things grow out of proportion, they become uninsurable. And then the damage is even larger because you don't have the money to rebuild things.
Well, I again have to agree with you, Luca. Thank you so much for all the great conversation already. Let me now jump into some questions we might have from the audience, and I'll be waiting to receive them here and ask them to you. I did not receive any questions yet from the audience, so maybe we can continue the conversation until we receive a few more. So you were saying that you are now also will be continuing in academia. What do you believe is very important for the scholars that you work with and also students to collaborate and also to work on the Republic of Science? Why is especially their contribution so important these days?
I think what we're doing here really is we're entering what I would call the ethical space of science. So science, was invented with a purpose. And actually, if we go back historically, we can even put a date on when things starting to really move. That was later than when science was invented. It was Galileo in the Italian Renaissance. But the real takeoff was after the catastrophic earthquake and tsunami of Lisbon. I think it was 1755 or something. So, and until then, people thought humanity would live in the best possible world. And then this thing happened, and then by some estimates, 50,000 people died in one night, by others 200,000. But then people realized, wait a second, this may not be the best possible world. Actually, this is a world that is pretty badly engineered. So can we address that? And then from that insight, many things evolved. I mean, we were in the middle of the emerging time of enlightenment. And during that time, things like insurance based on mathematical models took off, engineering took off based on science and material science as opposed to just some craftsmanship. And from there, you could see the Industrial Revolution emerging as an answer to this badly engineered world. Now, the next thing that then happened was, and people didn't realize when they did it, was that the response to the badly engineered world was a number of externalities that people didn't think of. I mean, in the 19th century, nobody was worrying about pumping the CO2 into the atmosphere because people didn't know that would cause some damage. And so, in a sense, whilst we're answering some problems, we're also creating new ones. And I think an important aspect of this Republic of Science thinking should be for the scientist to recognize early on in the process if somebody goes, creates some collateral damage that needs to be addressed, and then share that in the community. But that only works if you take a forward-looking positive attitude. So it doesn't help to say, but the virus came from China. The mutation, the bad one, came from Britain. The Spanish flu originated in the US in 1918. But that's not the point. Those accidents happen. The real point is to organize in a way that allows for a swift and effective response. So, and that's where I see the Republic of Science. And those are the things I'm going to teach students the moment normal life resumes, and I can do that.
Well, thank you, Luca. And then listening to this, I hear you saying that there are also new problems emerging in this world. And one of the problems that are also mentioned nowadays is the problem of safety and monitoring data around that. And maybe even if we look at wars, we spoke about the wars and around the world. How do you believe that in such new problems, data can play a role? Or maybe you have examples of other new problems that you have where this concept will also work.
No, but let me take an example. People would not process that in those terms. But let's take cyber risk. Okay. Now, cyber risk, everybody think of cyber risk, oh my gosh, it's the North Korean going over my laptop. Okay. So that may occur, but it's pretty unlikely. And I'm just taking a real black and white example. There's another problem that is hidden, that is only now starting to emerge, which is the risk of what I call the algorithmic risk. That is when algorithms start doing things they're not supposed to do. And this is unpredictable, at least as we stand, but probably will never be predictable. If you look into the basic science behind computer science and math, you know that you cannot develop a system that can audit a system. It's kind of you enter a strange loop, and then there's no definitive answer. However, as the world is relying more and more on machines, we will see more and more of those problems emerging. Now, how do you address those problems as they emerge? Is by sharing experience, sharing data. And the same applies for malevolent cyber attack as it applies to algorithmic accidents, if you want. So, but people don't want to share. So that's a reason why the cyber problem is so kind of so difficult to address. If people were sharing accidents that happen, attacks, algorithmic risk, anything around machines that are not working properly, then the response would be much faster. But everybody feels ashamed to share if they have a data breach. So reality is, by the time you actually discover, because eventually you discover it, this thing has infected everybody else. So that's another example of where there is no way around collaboration if we really want to rely on those new technologies that can make our life a lot easier. So, and the same is for climate, the same is for the next outbreak, and so on and so forth. And we need to realize, we're all thinking from the perspective of the Westphalian Treaty that ended the 30 Years' War and established the idea, if you want, of the nation state, with everybody kind of being very jealous of sovereignty and jurisdiction and so on and so forth. So that worked pretty well when people, kind of moving from, Holland to France would actually walk. If they were rich, they would have a horse. Okay. Now we're living, now we're living in a world when people in Europe may have been doing vacation in in Vietnam or in Myanmar or wherever, and not having visited the next country. So the mobility, the permeability of the world has increased by a magnitude, and you cannot, those borders are losing more and more in importance in terms of a defensive fence that you can build. So, and therefore, there is no way around solving problems through international cooperation. And that will mean giving up in some areas some of the sovereignty that the states have built. But in return, you may be getting, faster access to knowledge, better development, and so on and so forth. So, but that is a mindset thing that needs to change. Unfortunately, populism goes against that tendency, but that I would say is kind of a nostalgia for an old world that doesn't exist anymore.
Well, we thank you so much, Luca. One last question before we wrap up this session. So there might still, so one more time again, maybe you can explain to the audience, what is the Republic of Science? And if there are still people who do not want to share their data, what would you like to say to them so they all get encouraged to get enthusiastic for this initiative?
There are two things really. First of all, maybe kind of what is the definition of the Republic of Science in the spirit that I was talking about? And I would say this thing is evolving into what I would call a collaboration platform on which scientists collaborate in a fenceless manner to solve the world's big problem. And fenceless is the key word here. So the other thing is, when people share data, they want to be empowered to control what happens with their data. So and that we discovered in the process that we went through, because of the technology that we have been using allows people to be in control. People are much more willing to share than if they didn't know what would happen with their data. So, and the combination of those two elements, collaboration platform, fenceless, and be in control so that people cannot fool you. I mean, those two aspects, it's all about trust. But, it's good to trust, but in many cases, better safe than sorry if you can control it. And if you can catch whoever is not behaving in the spirit of collaboration, that empowers you to take, a more courageous stance in sharing.
Well, I think, Luca, that's a beautiful end of our session here. Thank you so much for sharing this with us and the audience here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Same here. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so very much to our moderator there, Nupur. Great job. Luca, thank you so very much. As I was listening to him telling his story, I could not help but remember a very famous movie, one of my favorites, The Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch.